Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Riverdale Public Library Saturday Craft Program. And we have a book and a craft today called Red Tails and Feathers. And I'm Ms. Helen, and I'm not only a librarian, I'm also the owner of a parrot. Actually, two parrots. Here is one of them. Her name is Bella. And she looks kind of dull and gray, but if you look at her back and she opens her wings, you will see she is actually very colorful. And she also doesn't like the camera, so she is turning away from the camera as much as she can. But I think I'll give her some treats later, and then she'll forget about the camera and she'll do some fun things. So today I'm going to start with a story about another kind of bird. And as you can see, Bella does not, even though this program is called Red Tails and Feathers, she has feathers. She does not have a red tail. Other parrots do have red tails, like the African gray. And we are going to be reading about some wild birds today called red-tailed hawks. And the red-tailed hawk and his family that we're going to be reading about lives in Central Park in New York City. And if you go to Central Park along Fifth Avenue, not far from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, there's a big pool, and not a swimming pool, just a pool for boats. Actually, it's the pool that was used in Stuart Little. And there's a building right near there across the street, and a famous family of hawks lives there. And the hawk who started it all is named Pale Male. And I'm going to be reading to you a story about Pale Male today. And after that, you will see some more Bella. You will meet my second parrot. Yes, I have two parrots. And we will do a bird craft together. Okay, so let's put Bella up here. She can play along. In fact, let's give her a treat for being such a good girl. Hey, good girl. A treat? A yummy nut? No? No yummy nut? There we go. There's a yummy nut. Go have fun. Okay, while she's eating, we're going to do some reading about Pale Male. And this book is called City Hawk, and it is by Megan McCarthy. City Hawk, the story of Pale Male. New York City is bustling with cars, buses, and people hurrying to important places. There are lots of tall buildings, lots of streets, and lots of pollution. And here you have a whole big picture of a street that looks kind of like mine. I live in New York City. And that's why so many people flock to the city's largest park for a needed escape. While in Central Park, New Yorkers can take a nap in the grass, play catch on one of the sprawling lawns, or get a glimpse of a squirrel scurrying up a tree. What they never expect is to see real wildlife, animals that usually make their homes in forests or on mountaintops or by rivers or in the suburbs or in Riverdale. I've seen red-tailed hawks there too. I've seen all kinds of wildlife there. But they usually don't, many of them don't come to the city. Well, passers-by couldn't believe their eyes one day when a red-tailed hawk was spotted flying over Fifth Avenue. Bird watchers took an interest in the hawk. They named him Pale Male because of his light feathers. Day after day, month after month, Pale Male could be seen soaring high above Central Park. Here he is. Flying along Fifth Avenue. after Pale Male was sighted near a pond in Central Park. This is a pond with a bridge that's in the southern part of the park. Then they saw him flying over the Metropolitan Museum of Art and by a hot dog stand. Well, every year the ritual began. He decided to stay. And one year, Pale Male found a bird named Lola. She was a hawk too. Her feathers were darker than his, and she was bigger in size. Pale Male dove and swooped and fluttered around Lola. Together, the two birds gathered twigs and branches and piled them atop an apartment building overlooking Central Park. So you have the park on one side of Fifth Avenue, and then they built their nest in a building across the street. There were large spikes on that building, and they were meant to keep away the pigeons, because New York does have a lot of, if you're going to talk about wildlife in New York City, pigeons. And the builders of the building wanted to keep the pigeons away. But as it turned out, oops, Bella, I saw that. As it turned out, the hawks actually preferred those spikes because they were able to put twigs in between them and build a big nest on top of that building. But what Pale Male and Lola didn't know was that they were being watched. Across Fifth Avenue, into Central Park, and past a small body of water called the Boat Pond, and here is the pond. Yes, this is the one in Stuart Little. Same pond. There was a group of people watching the hawks intently. They were young people and old people, men and women. The most dedicated of these bird watchers called themselves the Regulars. They almost started their own little club, the Regulars, people who watched the hawk family. The Regulars carried big cameras and big telescopes. They watched the action excitedly, like diehard fans watching their favorite sporting event. But they weren't watching sports. This is what they were watching for. The question on everybody's mind was, did they lay eggs? Yes, they did. But when would they hatch? The Regulars arrived at the park before the sun came up and didn't leave until the sun went down. They waited in the rain. They waited in the dark. They waited and waited and waited. Finally, 2 babies were born. They chirped excitedly for food. Pale Male was a good dad and worked tirelessly to bring plenty of food back for them. The Regulars named one baby Handsome and the other one Gretel. When the babies grew enough feathers and became strong, it was time for them to fly. Most hawks usually practice flying by hopping from tree to tree. But there were no trees. Remember, the nest was not in the park. The nest was on top of a tall building or close to the top. So the babies would have to leap off the tall building and fly across Fifth Avenue to reach any tree. And the fall down would be far. So people really worried, would they make it to a tree? Well, they hopped and they hopped and they hopped some more, but none of them flew. But at last, probably when not so many people were looking, early one morning, just when the sun was coming up, one baby took the first flight, disappearing into the dark blue sky. And the daylight brought new excitement Soon both babies were exploring the park. The regulars watched it all. Their early mornings and late nights in the park were worth every minute. If you go to Central Park and you watch and you wait, you may see a pale feathered hawk. And come spring, chances are there will be a nest. And you'd think there would be, that's it, that's the end of the story, right? Hawk came, found a mate, built a nest, had babies, they had babies, and that's the end of the story, right? But there's so much more. And in the back of the book, you could read more about the story of Pale Male and his family. But there was a bad part of the story that did get fixed. At one point, the people who lived in the building where the nest was, they decided they didn't want that nest there. Why? Well, imagine this. You live in that building. You walk out the door, and what falls on your head? Boom. Hawk leftovers. Well, you know what hawks eat? They eat mice. They eat other birds, small birds. Basically, you would have mouse tails, mouse feet, mouse heads, bird bones dropping on your head when you walk out the door, or maybe you're stepping on one. Yuck. So the people who lived in the building weren't too happy about that, and they took down the nest one year. And there was such an outcry. People were so upset that the nest was taken away that they went to City Hall and they argued that the nest should come back. So there was a huge, huge fight in it. It was in the newspapers. This was about 15, 20 years ago. It was a big, big story. It was on TV. Somebody made a film about it. And so they finally they allowed the nest to come back. Bella, no shoulder. No shoulder. No. Hello, Bella. No, you're not allowed on the shoulder. Because you know what happens when they go on your shoulder? They get very bossy. I'm in charge. So, yes, Bella, I'm in charge. So, they allowed the nest to come back. And but they built like a guard over it so that if things fell, it wouldn't fall on people's heads. So the nest is still there. People are still watching. The birds come back every year. Some of the babies and their babies and their babies have built nests in Central Park. So if you go to that area, you will see red-tailed hawks flying around. And they're really fun to watch, and it's fun to watch the people watching the hawks as well. So that is the story of Pale Male. And there's another picture book about him. Pale Male, Citizen Hawk of New York City. And that one is by Janet Schulman. So, and I think there's one more by Jeanette Winter. I think there are 3 different picture books about Pale Male, because it was quite a big story. Yes. No books about you, Bella. Sorry. Hey, you want a piece of fortune cookie? Piece of fortune cookie? There we go. Good girl. There we go. Go on back. Okay. So now we're going to go on to part 2. And we're going to do a craft using a picture of a parrot. And if you brought the kits home, you'll have kits with the materials. And if you don't have a kit, I'll tell you in part 2 what materials you'll need. And we will move on to part 2. And when I see you then, you will meet parrot number 2. Her name is Gal.